Hello, this is Luke Middlebrook doing observations for 795A, summer 2015. Observations. Observations offer us qualitative and quantitative data for research. The definition being the action or process of observing something or someone carefully or in order to gain information. So there are a few different types of observations that we use in education in order to improve our program evaluations or our programs themselves. So the type of observations that we use most commonly are natural observations. Observations of behavior in more or less natural setting without any attempt to intervene. Observation with intervention. Observation in which behavior is observed with an input from the researcher. Structured observation. Observation of a scenario created by the researchers to study behavior due to the scenario. So an example of natural observation would be Charles Darwin. He landed in the Galapagos Islands and he had a natural observation of the way that things are. So he observed the world in a natural state. He had no intervention into what he was observing. It just happened. So this is probably one of the most famous natural observations. A natural observation is something we do every time we try to go into a classroom observation of just a classroom that we have. We try to keep things as natural as possible. Before we walk in that classroom, there are already foundations, there are already behaviors in place, there are delivery methods of content, and we want to see the way that class acts, the way that teacher responds, the way the students learn in the most natural setting of that classroom. And that's what we really want to do as observers, especially when we're in classroom observations, is to see it in the natural state, to see what's really happening in that classroom. Observation with intervention. So this could be the observers incorporating a variable into what they're observing. So the environment. One way we can do this, and one way we do this, is incorporating technology into a classroom to see how students respond, see if behaviors change, teaching patterns change, how the teacher responds, how the students interact. So that's one way, is we incorporate a variable with the intervention. And another way we do this is incorporating a contrived environment. So we can create an environment and bring subjects into that environment to see how they interact, to watch the behavior. And we do this a lot. Say we have, we're trying to see how the new testing works on map testing, and we bring a group of students in to a computer lab and have them do map testing and see how we watch the behaviors and the interactions. That would be a structured observation in our school setting. So those are some of the different types of observations that we use. Pros and cons of observation. So there are some pros and cons. They're the good and bad, and we're about to go over those right now. So the pros of observation. We can collect feedback from a source that can provide context and setting to an existing data set. So what I mean by that is if we have already started collecting numerical data or quantitative data, we can actually go back and start to do observations on a classroom and maybe collect some setting, maybe provide some context for those numbers. So if we see that students are scoring outrageously high on standardized tests, if we go back and do an observation of the classroom, we find that the teacher is teaching accelerated learning, they have a great classroom rapport, they have great foundations. We can start doing observations of the class in a natural setting to maybe understand the context and the setting of why the data we are getting later on. So it has a retroactive aspect to them as well. It has the capacity for the collection of qualitative and quantitative data simultaneously. So we can include the qualitative data set, which is how the students interacted. The students interacted this way, they measured this way, the classroom foundations were clearly stated, teachers responded this way, behavior management. So there's so many ways we can create qualitative data simply by writing these observations while we're there. But we can also create quantitative data by introducing metrics before we actually start the observation. We can incorporate quantitative data as how many questions did the teacher ask the students? How much time on average was or were the students allowed to think before they were asked to respond? How much time did students spend in groups in group work? How much time did the teacher spend at the front of the room teaching? These are all quantitative data sets that can be incorporated, and so now we have the option for qualitative and quantitative data. Another pro is we can watch a behavior react in a natural state or react to introduced stimuli. So as I've stated before, we can go into a classroom as an observer, sit in the back and watch the class take its course and watch to see how it runs in a natural form, or we can introduce stimuli to see how the subjects interact with new things in their environment. The next pro, data can be collected while the observation is in progress. This is one of the few chances we have to have in-the-moment collection of data. While we're there, we can collect data as it happens, rather than having to go back and analyze it post creation of the data. So it's really cool that we can collect and process this data in the moment while we're in this classroom. Now the cons of observation. Comparing one observation to another can be very difficult. Even if we use the same metrics and the same questions as we go to every classroom is going to be completely different. We have different teachers, we have different students, we have different stimuli, we have different days, we have different time periods, different periods themselves and part of the school hour. So there are so many different variables that it's really hard to compare one observation to another. They're very hard to set on the same scale. So we have to take that as a grain of salt, is being able to identify the similarities as well as the non-similarities, and it's really hard to compare them one to another. Another con can be, it is very time consuming. So it's very time consuming to create an observation, especially to create a quality sample. So what I mean by a quality sample is we can walk into a classroom and spend 5 minutes doing a quick observation, and we can take very shallow level observations from that. But if we want to create a quality sample as to what is really happening in that classroom, from the teaching and learning aspect to the content being taught, to the content being learned, and the real skills being acquiesced by the students, for that to happen, we have to spend time in the room, and it is very time consuming, and it may take a span of time for this observation to become complete. It might take a week, it might take a month, over the year to be able to get done. So observations take a lot of time from staff to be done. Another con, behavior can be manipulated if the subjects believe they are supposed to act in a certain way. We've done a lot of scientific studies, and we've seen that if subjects believe that there's a correct way to act, they're going to try to act that way. So if we, as program evaluators, walk into a classroom and students believe that what they're supposed to be doing is sitting quietly, writing down without talking to anyone and not making any noise, they're going to try to act that way that they think they're supposed to. If teachers believe that what they're supposed to be doing is direct instruction, they're going to design a lesson that is them staying at the front of the room and students taking notes. So there's the manipulation of the true behavior when the subjects think that they're supposed to act a certain way. So one way you can do that is by making sure that we try to keep it as naturalistic as possible. Another con, do not offer insight into why behavior happened or what thought was involved. So as we see is there's a lot of behaviors that can happen, a lot of attitudes, a lot of processes that are going on, but we are not able to see the thought of why students and teachers are acting that way. So we don't get to see the thought involved, which is another con. So how would a scholar use this approach? This would be a great approach for the beginning of a research study. Qualitative and quantitative data can be collected to build baselines for research and study. So we can assess the current behaviors, we can see the existing variables prior to the study and research actually beginning, we can see what's currently affecting these behaviors and try to reduce some bias as well as some intention with some variables affecting behavior. And we can allow for a snapshot of reality. So we can take an observation and see where reality is in that classroom, what it really looks like in a natural sense before we really start the research and getting deep. So we have an idea, a snapshot of what is really going on. So a famous study that used observation, one of the most influential and revealing social psychology studies of the 20th century was conducted by Stanley Milgram. So who was involved? Milgram introduces two strangers, a learner and a teacher. The learner was working for Milgram. So the process was the teacher would ask the learner to ask a question. If the learner was wrong, they would be shocked. And the setup, two strangers would meet, and the teacher would stay in one room and the learner would go to the other room. While the learner was working with Milgram, the teacher had no idea. And the teacher would ask questions to the learner, and a series of questions. If the learner got the question right, they'd move on to the next question. If the learner got the question wrong, they would get a shock from a panel of about 35 different switches. and every time they got it wrong, they would progress up the switch to a higher voltage, so they receive an electric shock. Over time, the learner would start to complain. The learner would start to say, "Stop, this hurts, please stop, I have a heart condition." During the time the teacher was in the room shocking and asking these questions, there would be an authority figure, a man in a white suit who would say, "Please continue. You must continue. You must continue. Please continue." And that's all they'd say. And they were the authority figure. And what we were trying to study was the aspect of how someone, a regular person, the teacher in this aspect, would respond to an authority figure in the fact of actually hurting another human being. A regular person would hurt another human being based on the fact that authority was in the presence and asking them to continue. This can all be seen in the YouTube video, which I've attached at the end of these resources. If you'd like to see the real study, it is very interesting. But this was an observation into how behavior is affected. This is one of the most pure actions and observations of our simple psychology as a human being. And I think it's one of the most important observations that we've seen in the study of social psychology. So this was a great observational study, a great observation revealing the social psychology that is innate in each of us. So lastly, here are the resources that I've collected for this study, this presentation. Once again, observation is one of the most key aspects to collecting qualitative and quantitative research. It allows us to collect both of them in the moment. It provides us with deep context and setting. They are very time consuming, but they can be very worth it if we can make sure that we provide a natural setting, or if we can limit the variables with intervention into the observation. Thank you.